The story begins in a very familiar way for anyone who follows Isekai series. The protagonist dies in his original world and is reborn in another one. After suffering a fatal accident, he wakes up in front of a blonde couple, speaking a completely unfamiliar language. Noticing his tiny hands, he quickly realizes that he has come back to life as a child in a new world. His name is now Rudeus, a member of the Greyrat family, a surname that will become important later in the story. As time passes, we watch the boy grow up at home. Despite his childish appearance, he still retains the memories and mindset of a 30-year-old otaku. During his early years, he mainly focuses on learning the local language and bothering the family's maid, Lilia, who seems somewhat uncomfortable with the expressions he often makes, and honestly, his face frequently reveals some far from innocent thoughts. On a normal day, we are introduced to Rudeus's father, Paul. Besides being extremely skilled with a sword, he is considered the strongest warrior in the region. At one point, the protagonist suffers a serious fall and fractures his skull. His mother, Zenith, uses magic to heal him. Witnessing something so extraordinary, he finally confirms his suspicions. He is truly living in a fantasy world. From that moment on, his real growth begins. When he turns 4, Rudeus finds a magic book. At first, he cannot understand any of it, but after a great deal of effort, he begins to grasp the basics of water magic. He immediately starts training, but his young age limits the amount of mana he can use, allowing him to cast only a simple attack. Even so, he refuses to give up. He experiments with different applications of magic while strengthening his body to increase his magical capacity. During this period, he also has to endure the nights when he hears his parents being very affectionate with each other. After several weeks of intense practice, Rudeus manages to cast a spell powerful enough to destroy the training room. His parents are amazed when they learn what happened and conclude that their son has extraordinary talent for magic. Because of this, they decide to hire a specialized tutor. Paul would rather see him training with a sword, but he recognizes that it is still too early for that, so the focus remains on magic studies. That is when Roxy appears, a blue-haired girl who becomes the series' first major waifu. Despite looking young, she is over 40 years old. Well, some people prefer the more experienced type. Roxy is an incredibly powerful mage and also belongs to the demon race. In this world, many demons have blue hair and animal-like features. The series basically suggests that a lot of them look quite similar to furries. During their first lesson, Rudy gets distracted while looking at his new teacher and accidentally casts a spell without reciting an incantation. This draws a lot of attention because magic normally requires chanting. At first glance, it seems like an unbelievable gift, but the truth is that he spent weeks practicing the technique on his own. It was not luck or a miracle, just dedication. The lessons continue, and Rudeus takes every opportunity he can to tease Roxy. During one conversation, he asks whether there are other types of demons. She mentions the Superert, a green-haired race with a gem on their forehead. According to her, any sensible person should run away immediately upon meeting one because they are extremely dangerous. Driven by curiosity, Rudeus also asks whether Roxy has a boyfriend. She replies that she has never had time for romance and believes nobody would fall in love with her. Trying to act like a true ladies' man, the boy tells her that he likes her. Since he is still just a child, Roxy rejects the confession, but she makes a playful promise. If he still feels the same way 10 years from now, she will consider accepting his feeling. Honestly, Rudeus managed to secure a potential fiancé at 5 years old. Some people never get that close. After an entire year of training, Rudeus turns 5 and takes part in a large celebration. In that society, this age carries special significance. Every member of the family gives him gifts, but the most memorable one comes from Roxy, who presents him with his first magic wand. However, a much more serious issue emerges at this point. Despite his new life, Rudeus still carries the emotional scars of his previous one. As a student, he was bullied because of his weight. He was harassed at home, humiliated at school, and mocked by other people. All of this turned him into an antisocial person who became accustomed to running away from his problem. For his final test, Roxy announces that he must leave home and accompany her to a distant location. The idea alone terrifies him. The fear of facing people and becoming a target of ridicule again makes him hesitate. Fortunately, Roxy does not abandon him. She encourages him throughout the journey and helps him confront his trauma. Thanks to her support, Rudeus manages to overcome part of his social anxiety. The two arrive at their destination, where they will perform the powerful Cumberunimbus spell. The magic is so impressive that it nearly knocks over the horse they used for the trip. But don't worry, the animal comes out unharmed. Using his new wand, Rudeus successfully casts the spell as well and passes his evaluation. Then comes the time to say goodbye, since she has already taught him everything she knows. Roxy decides to continue on her own path. Before leaving, she gives him one final gift, a necklace from her demon village, a place she hopes to visit again in the future. To Rudeus, she was much more than a teacher. She was the first person who truly helped him confront the trauma of his past life. The two part ways in tears right afterward. However, Rudeus does something rather questionable. He steals a piece of Roxy's clothing and keeps it as a souvenir. This kid really never misses an opportunity. With his mentor gone, he devotes his time to studying and training with Paul in swordsmanship. One day, he finds a group of boys harassing a green-haired child. Using basic magic, he drives the bullies away and helps the boy, who later reveals that he is an elf. This is where we meet Sylphiette. The child has green hair and, at first glance, looks a lot like the feared Superert. Fortunately, she does not have the famous gem on her forehead, so she poses no danger. Little by little, she and Rudeus grow closer. Realizing that Sylphiette is constantly bullied, Rudeus decides to protect her and become her friend. When he returns home, however, he gets scolded by Paul. The mother of the boys who were causing trouble complained that her son had been hurt. Without hearing the full story, Paul immediately switches into strict father mode and starts reprimanding him. Rudeus refuses to apologize to someone who was bullying another person. Since his father does not want to listen, he declares that he will continue being Sylphiette's friend and that together they will stand against anyone who tries to hurt her. At that moment, Paul finally realizes that his son was only defending someone. Even so, he finds it strange that a 5-year-old child argues like an adult. After that, the matter is dropped. Rudeus spends more and more time with Sylphiette and begins teaching her magic. Thanks to their constant time together, the two become best friends. Some time later, during a heavy rainstorm, Rudeus invites Sylphiette to spend the night at his house. However, after noticing a few details, he discovers something unexpected. Sylphiette was not a boy. She was actually a girl. Since the protagonist ended up seeing more than he should have, Sylphiette becomes extremely embarrassed. She stops looking at him, and it seems like their friendship has come to an end. While training with Paul, Rudeus receives some unusual advice on how to fix the situation. According to his father, showing regret and vulnerability is often an effective way to earn a woman's forgiveness. That way, they are more likely to overlook mistakes. Not long afterward, Sylphiette appears again. She says she does not hate him and wants to continue being his friend. Besides getting an important person back in his life, Rudeus is also excited because he believes he has just gained another potential fiancé his own age. And so, another year begins. One day, Zenith announces that she is pregnant with the family's second child. In the middle of the celebration, another surprising revelation appears. Lilia, the maid, is also expecting a baby. And who is the father? The answer comes quickly. The only adult man in the house, Paul, admits that he is responsible. With a level of courage few people would have to confess something like that in front of their own wife. He reveals that he had an affair with Lilia and now must deal with the consequences of this complicated situation. From that point on, things at home become tense. Zenith clashes with Paul because of the betrayal, while Lilia decides she will leave once the baby is born. The problem is that this plan would put both her and the child in a very difficult position. Rudeus recognizes the risk and decides to act, using his innocent childlike appearance to his advantage. Carefully, he convinces his mother that the blame falls entirely on Paul and that Lilia should not be punished for it. The strategy works. Zenith eventually agrees to let the maid stay in the house and raise the baby there. 9 months later, the new family members arrive. Zenith gives birth to a daughter, and so does Lilia, making them both younger sisters of Rudeus. The maid is deeply grateful for the help she received and promises that her daughter will be extremely loyal to him in the future. With the situation resolved, Rudeus receives a letter from Roxy, informing him about her promotion in the world of magic. She is now working in a distant city, teaching a chubby and unpleasant prince. Trust me, this character is going to be incredibly frustrating later on. Thinking about his future, Rudeus decides that he wants to study at the same magic university where Roxy works. The problem is that doing so would require leaving his hometown, something Sylphiette does not take well because she wants him to stay nearby. The protagonist then comes up with a bold idea: pay for both of their educations together. There is just one important detail missing: the money. Paul, who now has to support 3 children, 2 women, and 2 babies, immediately rejects the proposal and says that Rudeus should start working if he wants to pay for his studies. To everyone's surprise, the boy accepts the idea without complaint. As a result, Paul contacts an old adventuring companion, an incredibly strong cat woman named Ghislaine. Before leaving, father and son have one final training session together. During the fight, it becomes clear that Rudeus's magic is still too basic to deal with experienced swordsmen, and he is quickly defeated. When he wakes up, he is already in Ghislaine's carriage. She explains his new assignment: working for the noble branch of the Greyrat family as a tutor for the daughter of one of his relatives. It is at this moment that we learn the Greyrats are among the most influential families in that world. Rudeus also receives a letter from his father revealing more details about their relatives and confessing that he once had a relationship with Ghislaine. It becomes clear that the men of the Greyrat family do not exactly have a reputation for being faithful. Some time later, the boy arrives at the enormous mansion of the Boreas branch of the Greyrat family. There he meets Philip, Paul's cousin, and his daughter Eris, the third major girl in the story, and technically his distant cousin. Eris is introduced as an explosive, violent girl who is completely against the idea of being taught by a younger boy, realizing that she would never respect him otherwise. Rudeus comes up with a risky plan to earn her trust. In the middle of the night, the two are kidnapped. They wake up trapped in a dungeon surrounded by criminals. Eris tries to give orders like a noble, but the kidnappers beat her badly. The worst part is that this was never part of Rudeus's plan. The kidnapping was real. Taking advantage of the situation, he tries to negotiate with Eris. He tells her that he will help her escape if she stops treating him so badly and cooperates until they make it back home. With little choice, she agrees. The two manage to escape their cell, but the criminals find them again and capture Eris once more. Rudeus uses magic to fight back, and one of the criminals even offers him enough money to pay for his studies with Sylphiette. Though tempted, he refuses because he has no intention of leaving Eris in danger. He then creates a massive fire signal in the sky. Fortunately, Ghislaine arrives in time. The criminals try to fight her, but she defeats all of them without difficulty. It is also at this moment that Rudeus sees death up close for the first time. The next morning, the children return to the mansion, and Eris finally accepts Rudeus as her magic teacher. As her official tutor, he begins spending time with the rest of the Boreas family. Hilda, Eris's mother, initially shows some dislike toward him. The family leader, Soros, seems strict at first, but later turns out to be an eccentric old man who enjoys good food, fighting, and having fun with his beastfolk maids. Before the lessons truly begin, Rudeus insists that Eris personally ask to become his student. She even tries imitating a catgirl to convince him, but the result is so embarrassing that he prefers to pretend he never saw it. From that point on, their daily lives change completely. Rudeus teaches magic, reading, and mathematics to Eris and Ghislaine, while they help him train with the sword. It becomes obvious that Eris's greatest talent is close-quarters combat. As for math, she is a complete disaster. Another activity Rudeus frequently enjoys is sculpting small figures that resemble anime characters. Little by little, he begins spreading otaku culture throughout that world. The only question is whether the people there at least maintain decent hygiene habits. Later, he starts exploring the city to better understand commerce and find ways to earn money. During one of these outings, he notices a floating castle above the region. The structure belongs to Perugius, one of the world's great heroes, known for sealing the feared demon god Laplace, a being infamous for causing large-scale destruction. The studies continue normally until Eris's 10th birthday approaches. The family prepares a grand noble celebration, and the main attraction will be her dance performance. Because of this, Rudeus receives a few days off while she practices etiquette and dancing. He uses the free time to study new languages, especially the language of the beast folk. The problem is that Eris refuses to dance with anyone else and demands that he attend her lesson. During that week, Rudeus also sells one of his Roxy figurines to earn some money. By coincidence, the figure ends up in the hands of the disgusting prince studying under Roxy. Remember that detail because it will become important later. In addition, Roxy sends him a book about the demon language, encouraging him to visit the demon continent someday. The day of the party finally arrives. A noble tries to dance with Eris, but she moves far too quickly because of her sword training, and the two end up embarrassing themselves in front of everyone. Seeing the situation, Rudeus joins the dance to save her from further embarrassment. To boost her confidence, he tells her that he cast a special spell to help her dance better. In reality, he simply used magic to slow her down slightly and prevent her from tripping. Their performance impresses all of the guests, and Eris's feelings toward Rudeus begin to grow for real. After the dance, several young noble girls approach Rudeus with interest, which makes Eris furious. Without hesitation, she drags him away. At the end of the celebration, Rudeus gives magic wands as gifts to his students, while Ghislaine gives Eris a ring from her beastfolk clan, an accessory she will wear constantly from that point on. Later, everyone goes to sleep, but Eris accidentally ends up sharing a bed with Rudeus. The following morning, he wakes up early and finds Soros enjoying himself with one of the mansion's employees. Shortly afterward, the two spot a strange object flying through the sky. The old man clearly recognizes it, but chooses not to explain anything to the boy. Despite all the chaos, Rudeus is officially accepted as a member of the Boreas clan. A year passes, and he turns 10 years old. The family organizes another major celebration. Taking advantage of the emotional atmosphere, the protagonist decides to test everyone's feelings by pretending to be deeply moved by how warmly the family has accepted him. First, he starts crying and says that he never imagined being treated like a true member of the clan, which moves Soros so much that he nearly wants to start a war on Rudeus's behalf. Afterward, he receives a powerful magic staff as a gift from the entire family. Still playing up the drama, he comments that he misses his original relatives, whom he has not seen in 2 years. That statement reveals something unexpected. Hilda never truly hated Rudeus. In reality, she always wanted to adopt him, and even openly declares that he should become Eris's future husband. What a completely crazy woman. Meanwhile, we receive another important piece of information. Rudeus's family could not attend the celebration because the region where they live has been overrun by monsters. Combined with a strange object that appeared in the sky, it becomes increasingly clear that something very serious is about to happen. After the party, Philip calls Rudeus in for a private conversation. During their discussion, he reveals that his own children were sent to live with the main branch of the Greyrat family before the protagonist arrived at the mansion. The situation greatly upset Hilda, who did not like the idea of an unfamiliar boy taking a place that she believed should have belonged to her children. The conversation takes an even more unexpected turn when Philip directly asks whether Rudeus would be interested in marrying Eris in the future. The boy does not know how to respond. Seeing his hesitation, Philip practically suggests that the answer will be given that very night. Later, Eris appears in his room wearing rather revealing clothes. The situation quickly becomes awkward for both of them. Rudeus gets excited in record time, but everything falls apart when Eris panics and hits him without mercy. Despite the disaster, she promises that when she turns 15, she will be ready to handle that kind of situation. In other words, he will still have to wait another 5 years. For now, let's set that aside and return to the protagonist's homeland. Paul continues investigating the sudden increase in monsters alongside other adventurers. Meanwhile, Rudeus's younger sisters have grown a bit older and become close friends with Sylphiette. She is even planning to give him a necklace for his 10th birthday. Lilia also intends to send something special along with the gift, Roxy's famous panties, which she still keeps stored away like a treasure. Everything seems relatively calm until the situation begins to spiral completely out of control. For months, the mysterious red sphere in the sky continues to grow. The phenomenon becomes more and more threatening and appears ready to trigger a continent-wide catastrophe. Some of the most important figures in the world are the first to investigate. Among them are the Dragon God, a former demon empress, and Perugius himself. After realizing the danger, he sends one of his subordinates to discover the source of the strange phenomenon. By an incredible coincidence, the envoy arrives at the exact location where Rudeus and Eris are testing the new magic staff. The man sees the boy near the sphere and immediately concludes that he is responsible for everything. Without a second thought, he decides to kill him. Ghislaine steps in to protect him, but the opponent is far too strong. Before the battle can be resolved, the sphere explodes. An enormous wave of energy spreads across multiple regions of the human continent. Rudeus, Eris, and Ghislaine are swallowed by the blast and vanish. When Rudeus regains consciousness, he finds himself back in his old body. Convinced that he has died, he tries to understand what happened. That is when a mysterious figure appears before him, a man who introduces himself as God. According to him, he was responsible for bringing Rudeus into this world, and he claims that the phenomenon that just occurred will be extremely important to his future. His role, apparently, is to guide the protagonist whenever necessary. Even without fully understanding his words, Rudeus decides to listen to his advice. The first instruction is simple. When he meets a certain man, he must respect and help him regardless of the circumstances. Shortly afterward, he wakes up again. When he opens his eyes, he finds Eris sleeping beside a campfire. Not far away stands a green-haired demon with a shining gem on his forehead, a swordplay, the very race that Roxy described as the most dangerous of all. Instinctively, Rudeus prepares to fight, but he remembers the warning he received. Instead of attacking, he lowers his guard and uses the demon language he learned from the book Roxy sent him. That is how he meets Rudeus. Despite his intimidating appearance, the warrior proves to be completely different from the terrifying image associated with the swordplay. Rudeus quickly befriends him. When Eris wakes up, she is frightened at first as well, but soon realizes that he poses no threat. The two then discover their current situation. They have been teleported to the demon continent. With few options available, they decide to turn the journey home into a grand adventure. The news excites Eris tremendously, since she has always dreamed of experiencing journeys like those of the heroes from the stories she admired. Their first objective is to find a way back to the human continent. To do that, they travel to a village inhabited by blue-haired demons. By coincidence, it happens to be Roxy's hometown. At the gate, they meet none other than her father. Rudeus explains that he was his daughter's student and presents the necklace she gave him as proof. Thanks to that, the group gains access to the village and an audience with the local chief. The plan becomes simple: cross the continents and return to the Rudeus Greyrat mansion. Rudeus decides to accompany them as their bodyguard. Besides protecting them, he wants to prove to the world that the swordplay are not the cruel monsters everyone believes them to be. It is at this point that we learn the origin of their terrible reputation. Long ago, the demon god Laplace cursed the entire race by giving them spears that drove them to attack anyone around them, turning them into nearly unstoppable killing machines. The curse was so devastating that it permanently stained the image of the swordplay. However, observing Rudeus now, it is clear that he has no desire to harm innocent people. Everything suggests that the curse's influence faded over the centuries. The following day, the group says goodbye to Roxy's parents. Eris receives a sword to protect herself during the journey, while Rudeus jokingly says that when he returns, he will call them his in-laws. Their first priority now is making money. For that reason, they travel to a nearby city and register as adventurers. To avoid trouble, they dye Rudeus' hair, concealing his identity. Their goals are clear: earn resources and improve the reputation of the swordplay. Even so, as newcomers, they end up being intimidated by other adventurers during their first few days. The group decides to adopt the name Dead End, a reference to the old title once used by the swordplay. Before starting their work, Rudeus meets God again in his dreams. This time, he receives a strange instruction: accept a quest involving a missing cat. Without understanding why, he follows the recommendation. The investigation leads him to a criminal organization that kidnaps animals and later profits from the rewards offered by their owners. After uncovering the scheme, Rudeus tries to negotiate. However, the gang leader decides to attack him. The protagonist's reaction is immediate: consumed by anger, he kills the criminal. The moment shows that part of his aggression still remains. Afterward, he makes a deal with the remaining members of the organization. They will provide information about profitable quests in exchange for a share of the rewards. The arrangement is illegal according to the Adventurers Guild rules, but nobody intends to report anyone. Meanwhile, another problem appears. A mysterious horse-like demon begins watching them inside the guild. His intentions are unknown, but they are clearly not good. At the same time, the story shifts back to the human continent. Chaos has taken over the region. We discover that Rudeus and Eris were not the only ones affected by the explosion. Thousands of people vanished or were teleported to unknown locations. Among the hardest hit areas are the Greyrat mansion and the village where Rudeus's family lived. Many relatives and acquaintances remain missing. Roxy arrives at the protagonist's former home and finds nothing but destruction. While checking the missing persons board, she finds a letter left behind by Paul. In it, he explains that he is traveling with one of his daughters, but that Zenith, Lilia, and Aisha are still missing. Paul also expresses confidence that Rudeus is alive and asks that, if possible, information about the missing family members be gathered on the demon continent. If no clues can be found, he should return home. After reading the message, Roxy makes her decision. She will immediately set out in search of the missing people. To help her, she gathers two of Paul's former adventuring companions, an elf and a dwarf. Let's be honest, an elf, a dwarf, and a mage forming a party sounds a lot like certain famous fantasy stories. Meanwhile, on the demon continent, Rudeus and his companions remain completely unaware of the message Paul left behind. They are far too busy trying to earn money and survive. During a mission to hunt a creature in a dangerous region, they come across a group of veteran adventurers mistreating some rookies. The situation quickly catches the attention of the Dead End Party. The three groups take different paths during the hunt, but Rudeus decides to keep an eye on the rookies because he cannot stop worrying about their safety. Along the way, they encounter several dangerous beasts. Rudeus orders everyone not to step in right away, explaining that they need to wait for the perfect moment to act. However, while they are waiting, one of the children is killed right in front of them. The incident leaves Rudeus and Eris furious. Unable to hold themselves back, they charge in and quickly defeat the monsters. Afterward, the Superd criticizes Rudeus harshly, calling him selfish and controlling since things always seem to go wrong whenever they follow his instructions. Fortunately, one of the rookies comes to the protagonist's defense. He says the responsibility is also theirs because they accepted a mission beyond their abilities, and announces that their party will retreat. The search continues until they finally find the creature they were looking for. The monster has been feeding on the selfish adventurers they encountered earlier. Working together, the group manages to weaken the beast. At the decisive moment, Rudeus lands the finishing blow and turns the enemy into a giant donut, just like what happened to Rengoku. As a result, he earns his first victory against a truly powerful creature. When they return to town, they run into the demon horse. He has discovered the scheme the group used to complete advanced quests and threatens to report them unless they hand over all of their rewards. This causes Rudeus to explode with anger, as he is already tired of seeing everything go wrong. His outburst creates a massive cloud over the city, something Rudeus notices immediately. Using a bit of water, Rudeus reveals the horse's true fur color, leaving the demon completely terrified. Feeling cornered, he threatens to kill everyone and reveals that he saw exactly what happened. He also warns them that if his records mysteriously disappear, he will be the first victim, which would serve as evidence against them. Not knowing what else to do, Rudeus runs away. Some time later, the children find him outside the city. The boy apologizes for trying to control everything through orders. His goal was to get things done quickly, but in the end they barely made any progress. Even so, he says he does not care whether he gets help or not. His only concern is getting everyone home safely because he believes it is a warrior's duty to risk his own life to protect the weak. After hearing those words, the members of the group begin to see him differently. They realize they share many of the same values and decide to stay focused on their main mission. Before setting out again, Rudeus shaves his head and hides his gem with a bandana similar to Naruto's. Time passes quickly, and before they realize it, an entire year has gone by. The group finally reaches the coast of the demon continent, where they need to board a ship to continue their journey. The problem is that the crossing is extremely expensive. During that time, the party became famous thanks to their superhero. Interestingly, people are no longer afraid of him, but that does not stop them from charging outrageous prices. Since they need money fast, Rudy decides to seek God's advice once again. This time, the guidance is simple. Walk through the city and offer food to the poorest person he can find. While Rudeus searches for that person, Rudeus spends his time training Eris and helping her improve her swordsmanship. During training, he notices someone watching them from a distance. It is Roxy. The small demon mage traveled to the demon continent to investigate the disappearance of people affected by the teleportation incident. Her main goal is to find Rudeus. The two nearly meet, but everything falls apart when she spots the famous superhero and gets scared. Meanwhile, Rudeus finds the poorest person in the city and shares his food with them. To his surprise, that person is none other than the Empress of the Underworld. As a reward, she offers him anything he wants. The protagonist asks for money, world domination, or even her body. Naturally, none of those requests can be granted. Instead, she gives him something far more valuable. A demon eye. This power allows him to foresee future events, functioning almost like the ability to see the future. After receiving the gift, Rudeus returns to the group to learn how to control his new ability. On the way, he bumps into a man and pulls him aside just before a flower pot crashes down onto his head. Everything happens exactly as he predicted thanks to his new eye. Later, he challenges Eris to a sword duel to test his ability. During the fight, the boy is able to anticipate all of the redhead's movements, including her tricks. It becomes clear that his cursed eye will be incredibly useful in combat. That night, Rudeus spends hours thinking of ways to make money and considers selling his magic staff. Rudeus advises him against it, reminding him that the staff symbolizes the bond he and Eris built throughout their journey. In his opinion, something that important is not worth throwing away. Shortly afterward, the same man Rudeus had saved reappears. He reveals that he is a smuggler. As a way of repaying the favor, he offers to help them cross the Demon Sea for a much more affordable price. Thanks to him, the group finally reaches the human continent. Meanwhile, Roxy continues her own journey. The dwarf spends most of his time drinking, while the elf proves to be quite the ladies' man. He is constantly involved in romances and takes advantage of every opportunity that comes his way. Many people misunderstand his behavior, but there is actually a reason behind it. Revealing it now would spoil the story, so that explanation will have to wait. Roxy keeps searching for clues about her missing student until she hears rumors about an adventuring party with extraordinary powers. She decides to investigate and ends up spotting Rudeus. Startled, she quickly returns to the inn, where she finds several men gathered around the ladies' man. The situation turns chaotic after one of Roxy's explosive reactions. Back to our heroes. Eris needs to rest because she became sick during the sea voyage. As a result, Rudeus heads out alone to find the smuggler and try to rescue Rudeus. At the criminal's hideout, he discovers several kidnapped beast children along with a sacred beast being held captive. Rudeus believes they should save everyone simply because it is the right thing to do. The protagonist, on the other hand, wants to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, so he plans to rescue only the children while the super deals with the criminal. The rescue goes smoothly, but the children insist that the sacred beast must be saved as well. Rudeus approaches it, removes the magical seal keeping it imprisoned, and the creature immediately shows its gratitude. Things spiral out of control when a beast warrior suddenly appears. With a single strike, he knocks our protagonist unconscious. The beast folk had come to rescue the girls and conclude that Rudeus is one of the smugglers. Since they cannot account for all of the children, they take the boy prisoner, locked up in the beast folk village. He falls into despair. Even though he understands their language, nobody believes he is innocent. For several days, he is given spoiled food, bathed with dirty water, and even stripped of his clothes to increase his humiliation. With no other options, Rudeus simply waits for Eris and Rudeus to come save him. Days pass without any sign of them. Then, one day, the beastfolk capture a monkey-like man who had scammed a member of the tribe. He ends up imprisoned in the same area as the protagonist. The monkey man becomes his only source of information. Through him, Rudeus learns that his companions are searching for the families of the rescued children. Only after that do they plan to come back for him. In other words, he has been pushed to the bottom of the priority list. All he can do is wait. However, one night, the village comes under attack by smugglers planning to kidnap even more girls. Taking advantage of the chaos, Rudeus escapes. Soon afterward, he sees the criminals killing people and setting the village on fire. Together with his monkey man friend, he decides to help. Using his magic, he creates a massive rain cloud to extinguish the flame. The beastfolk warriors witness the feat and, in gratitude, allow him to join the mission to rescue the kidnapped children. During the pursuit, they discover that the leader of the smugglers is the very same man who helped Rudeus cross over to the human continent. Besides being a criminal, he is also an exceptionally skilled fighter who once served as a noble soldier. However, he abandoned that life because he felt the pay was too low. To him, the slave trade was far more profitable. At the start of the confrontation, the criminal tries to convince Rudeus to join his business and get rich quickly. The protagonist immediately refuses. The battle proves difficult, but at the decisive moment, the sacred beast returns. Fighting alongside the heroes, it helps turn the tide. Thanks to their teamwork, the group finally defeats the smuggler. Later, our protagonist wakes up in the village surrounded by his companions. The beastfolk apologize for wrongly judging him. After everything they have been through, Eris is eager to tell her grandfather all about her adventures, which brings up an important question. What happened to her grandfather and the rest of her family? The situation takes an even more tragic turn. The capital decides to hold the Boreas branch responsible for the teleportation disaster, and those involved are executed. As a result, Eris never gets the chance to see her grandfather again or tell him about everything she experienced. It is a truly cruel ending for him. Meanwhile, the group remains in the village while waiting for the water levels to go down. During this time, Rudeus tries to build a closer bond with the sacred beast. Eris, meanwhile, spends much of her time with two beast girls and becomes close friends with them. At one point, the village chief notices that Eris is wearing a ring bearing the village's emblem. The ring belonged to Ghislaine. It is then revealed that the man is actually her older brother. However, instead of expressing pride, he says that Ghislaine was the greatest mistake of his life and that he never considered her a true warrior. His words make Eris furious. She refuses to let anyone speak about her master that way. When the beast girls ask what Ghislaine was really like, Eris answers with admiration. She describes her teacher as an extraordinary swordswoman and declares that she was the greatest warrior on any continent. As the days pass, the water finally recedes, allowing the journey to continue. However, one of the beast girls does not want to say goodbye to Eris. What starts as a simple argument quickly turns into a small fight between the two. Watching the scene, the general remembers the last argument he had with his sister. That fight was what drove them apart. Since then, they never met again, something he deeply regrets. Not wanting his daughter to carry the same regret, he encourages her to set aside her pride and apologize. In the end, the two girls make up, remain friends, and promise that they will meet again someday. Before leaving, Eris also faces the general in a friendly duel. Afterward, the entire group resumes their journey toward the nearest human city. Along the way, the monkey boy decides to travel with them for a while. At one point on the road, they come across a monument displaying the names of the 7 great powers, the 7 strongest individuals in the world. Who are they? That answer will have to wait until later. Once they reach their destination, the group takes the opportunity to rest. Eris mentions that she would like to hunt goblins. Rudeus is not particularly enthusiastic about the idea, but he also knows that Eris is strong enough to handle that kind of threat without any trouble. The next day, Rudeus writes a letter to Paul describing everything he has experienced since the teleportation incident. However, while walking through the city, he notices several criminals kidnapping a young boy. Without hesitation, he decides to follow them. To avoid drawing attention, he uses a piece of cloth he finds along the way as a disguise and infiltrates the criminals' hideout. Everything goes smoothly until their leader appears. The man is a drunken swordsman, but his skills are incredibly impressive. During the confrontation, Rudeus immediately recognizes his fighting style. To his surprise, the man is none other than his own father, Paul. Father and son are finally reunited. Rudeus begins recounting everything he went through during his long journey. To most people, his story sounds like an incredible adventure. Paul, however, sees it very differently. Fueled by alcohol, he accuses his son of wasting precious time traveling with a girl instead of finding a faster way home. Rudeus does not take the criticism seriously and fires back, suggesting that his father was probably too busy with yet another one of his countless relationships. The remark enrages Paul, who punches his son. The two soon end up in a real fight. Despite his father's experience, Rudeus manages to gain the upper hand. The argument only comes to an end when Norn appears. Since she does not recognize her own brother, she immediately runs to protect Paul. That is when the father finally reveals the truth. Rudeus was not the only victim of the disaster. The entire village was scattered across the world. His mother, his half-sister, Lilia, Sylphiette, and many other villagers were transported to unknown locations. Some have managed to return, but many others were kidnapped, sold into slavery, or remain missing. Because of that, Paul argues that Rudeus's hardships cannot compare to the suffering endured by the other victims. He also admits that he expected his son to return sooner and help search for the rest of the family. Overcome by frustration, he ends up calling the boy a coward. The words hit Rudeus hard. He begins to feel as though all of his efforts were meaningless. The truth, however, is that both of them made mistakes. Paul placed excessive expectations on his son, while Rudeus focused entirely on his own situation without considering the many other people who had disappeared. Later, the monkey boy, who works with Paul, speaks with the protagonist. He explains that his boss is under enormous pressure and reminds Rudeus that he is still just a child. He also points out that taking care of Rudeus is already a huge responsibility, and that doing so does not make him selfish. After reflecting on everything, Paul finally decides to change his attitude. He gives up drinking, cleans himself up, and goes looking for his son to apologize. When Rudeus sees him again, he realizes just how much his father is suffering. Just like in the past, life has placed him in front of tremendous hardship. The difference is that now he is not running away from his problems or blaming others. His only goal is to find everyone who disappeared. Finally understanding the situation, Rudeus accepts Paul's apology. The two put their argument behind them with an emotional embrace. The following day, the group resumes their journey. They will need to cross the ocean once again. The difference is that now Rudeus can travel with them without any issues, thanks to the resources provided by Paul, which make the crossing much easier. Meanwhile, we return to the demon continent to check in on Roxy. She runs into an old adventurer acquaintance, the same horse demon who once threatened our protagonist. This time, however, he acts in a friendly manner. Roxy asks whether any humans have passed through the region recently. The horse mentions hearing rumors about a group of children traveling alongside an incredibly powerful individual, but he does not have any detailed information. Since Roxy has already heard similar rumors before, she continues to avoid any contact with this mysterious group. A short time later, she decides to return to her hometown. The decision is not an easy one. After all, Roxy left home without telling anyone. When she was younger, she struggled because she could not use telepathy like the other members of her race. Because of that, she was treated as different. When she turned 18, she decided to run away from the village, leaving her parents extremely worried. When she finally returns, she admits that she missed them. Roxy spends at least one night with her family. During a meal, her parents tell her that they met Rudeus and that he returned to the human continent alongside a powerful ally. Hearing this, Roxy feels enormous relief knowing that her student is still alive and safe. After the visit, she resumes her search for the rest of his family. Meanwhile, God contacts Rudeus once again to check on his progress. The protagonist is still upset about everything that has happened recently and blames God for many of his problems. Even so, he continues following the advice he receives, as long as it is more straightforward. This time, God tells him that he is close to the city where he will find his half-sister. According to the prediction, she will help him locate Lilia. However, there is one important condition: he must not reveal his true identity. Upon arriving in the city where Roxy once worked, Rudeus assumes that his former teacher is still living in the castle and teaching the detestable prince. Unaware that she remains on the demon continent, he decides to write her a letter. Shortly after leaving to send it, he notices that someone is following him. It turns out to be a small red-haired girl dressed as a maid. Unfortunately, several guards catch up to her and try to confiscate a letter addressed to her father. Rudeus quickly intervenes and manages to rescue her, taking her somewhere safe. Once they are away from the guards, he discovers that the girl is Aisha, his half-sister. Fortunately, Aisha does not recognize Rudeus and keeps her own identity hidden as well. She then asks for his help. Her mother, Lilia, is still trapped inside the castle and is being treated as the property of one of the princes. On top of that, she wants to send a message to Paul letting him know that she is still alive. After the teleportation incident, Aisha and Lilia ended up in that kingdom and were turned into slaves. Through tremendous effort, Aisha managed to escape. Now, her greatest goal is to free her mother. The heroes agree to protect her from the guards until the following morning. However, before they can take action, a messenger from the prince arrives and summons Rudeus to the castle. The reason for the summons is unexpected. According to the messenger, Roxy wishes to meet him. Without suspecting anything, Rudeus accepts the invitation and heads to the castle. There, he discovers that it was all a trap created by the disgusting, overweight prince. The noble's plan is to use our protagonist as bait in a magical setup to capture and abuse the small demon mage. Once again, Rudeus finds himself trapped with no way out. His only hope is that Rudeus and Eris will show up to help him. Unfortunately, by pure coincidence, both of them are busy dealing with their own problems. Everything suggests that God has deceived him once again. Then an unexpected figure appears. Inside the dungeon, Rudeus meets the kingdom's eldest prince, Zenoba. The young man owns a figurine of Roxy and knows perfectly well that its creator is none other than Rudeus himself. The prince turns out to be a genuine enthusiast of figures and collectibles, just as passionate about them as Rudeus. He studied the figurine created by the protagonist down to the smallest detail and even figured out how to perfectly replicate its structure. Recognizing the opportunity, Rudeus makes him an offer. He promises to accept Zenoba as his student if he helps him escape. Curious, Zenoba asks who was responsible for putting him behind bars. The moment he hears it was his brother, the overweight prince, he decides to take action immediately. Meanwhile, Rudeus and Eris contact soldiers throughout the kingdom to organize a rebellion against the tyrannical prince. The problem is that there is another member of the royal family whom everyone fears. This prince possesses monstrous physical strength and is said to be capable of tearing off a person's head with his bare hands. By a twist of fate, that prince is none other than Zenoba. After joining forces with Rudeus, he handles the situation in the simplest way possible. He confronts the brother responsible for the tyranny and completely destroys his authority. Within moments, the oppressive regime comes to an end. With the situation under control, Rudeus helps free the relatives of the guards who had been held hostage. During the process, Lilia is finally reunited with her daughter. Filled with gratitude, she thanks Rudeus for everything he has done and returns several important belongings that had been kept safe. Among them are Roxy's clothes and the necklace Sylphiette intended to give him as a present when he turned 10. Aisha also insists on thanking him. After everything that happened, she wishes to become her brother's official servant. Rudeus, of course, refuses the idea. Instead, he gives her his old adventurer identification card and promises that they will meet again in the future. After that, Aisha and Lilia set off for the city where Paul is living. Before they part ways, an interesting detail is revealed. Throughout all this time, Aisha already knew that the adventurer was her older brother. As for Zenoba, his future leads him to a special academy. By this point in the story, 3 years have passed since the teleportation incident. Eris is now 15 years old, while Rudeus has reached 13. To mark this important milestone, Rudeus decides to have one final battle with the young swordswoman. After the fight, he officially acknowledges her growth and declares her an advanced rank warrior. This means she is now qualified to participate in wars and be treated as an adult. Eris is so surprised that she thinks she must be dreaming. To make sure it is real, she asks Rudeus to come get her. He agrees without knowing what awaits him and ends up taking a beating in the process. Shortly afterward, the group resumes their journey toward the Boreas territory. However, before they reach their destination, they encounter someone far more dangerous than any enemy they have faced so far. Remember the 7 great powers? One of them is standing right in front of them. It is Orsted, the dragon god. The moment they see him, Rudeus and Eris avoid looking directly at him. Their behavior makes it clear that they understand just how dangerous he is. Rudeus, on the other hand, has no idea what is going on and simply asks who he is. Orsted replies that he is the dragon god and one of the 7 great powers. He also mentions that he has heard rumors about their traveling party, especially about Rudeus and Eris. The protagonist does not think much of it. To him, Orsted just seems like another powerful mage. Everything changes when Orsted asks whether he knows the human god. Without a second thought, Rudeus says yes and even mentions that he speaks with him frequently. The reaction is immediate. Orsted attacks. Within seconds, Rudeus is defeated and knocked unconscious. Eris suffers devastating injuries. As for Rudeus, he receives a fatal blow. Unable to do anything, Eris watches in despair as the person who promised to protect her collapses before her eyes. After his death, Rudeus awakens in a strange place high in the sky, where he once again meets the human god. During their conversation, he learns more about Orsted. The dragon god and the human god are ancient enemies. According to the story he is told, Orsted seeks revenge because his father, the first dragon god, was killed long ago. Another important revelation concerns Orsted's curse. It drives away almost all forms of life. People and creatures instinctively feel fear or disgust around him without understanding why. Rudeus is an exception because he came from another world. Something similar happened with Rudeus. After shaving his head and hiding his symbol, his own curse lost part of its influence. It is almost as if fate has been slowly bringing the 3 of them together. Despite all the hardships he has endured, the human god reminds Rudeus that he has survived countless impossible situations. Even so, the boy still believes that the entire universe is conspiring against him. Sometime later, he awakens once again. To his surprise, he discovers that he was saved by Orsted's companion. For some reason, they decided to keep him alive. Later, he speaks with Rudeus and receives another piece of good news. The curse that followed him for so long has finally disappeared. He can now travel without automatically frightening people. The journey continues until they finally arrive in Boreas territory. There, the shared adventure of Rudeus, Eris, and Rudeus comes to an end. Before saying goodbye, Rudeus gives his friend a few gifts. Among them are a figurine he made himself and his demon eye necklace. They are keepsakes meant to preserve the friendship they built throughout their journey. Then it is finally time for Rudeus to leave. Meanwhile, Rudeus and Eris arrive at the ruined Boreas mansion, where Ghislaine has managed to return. Soon afterward, they receive devastating news. The Boreas family has been wiped out. The tragedy leaves everyone in shock. Faced with the situation, only one option remains to preserve the family's name: marry Eris to an influential noble. Naturally, she hates the idea, but she believes it may be the only way to help her family. Without telling anyone about her decision, Eris is left alone to think. That same night, she goes to see Rudeus. She tells him that she wants to start a family with him. At first, the protagonist pretends not to understand and points out that they are already distant relatives. To him, that already makes them family. But that is not what Eris means. She wants something much more serious. The two had already promised that their first time would be when Rudeus turned 15. However, Eris decides not to wait that long. They spend the night together. The next morning, Rudeus wakes up happy, believing that everything is finally working out. But then he finds something unexpected. On the floor are Eris's cut-off hair and a letter. In the message, she says that she hates him and that he was terrible. The words completely shatter the protagonist emotionally. He believes he was abandoned and used. However, the truth is completely different. Eris left with Ghislaine to train. Her goal is to become strong enough to reclaim her family's lost status and rebuild it alongside Rudeus in the future. She lied only because she knew he would try to follow her if he learned her true plans. Meanwhile, Roxy continues her own journey. At one point, she meets the Demon Empress again and decides to help her with a difficult situation. As a reward, the Empress uses her powers to discover the whereabouts of the Greyrat family. Paul is alive alongside Aisha, Norn, and Lilia. Rudeus is emotionally devastated, and Zenith remains trapped inside a dungeon. After learning this information, Roxy immediately sets out to find her. As for the protagonist, he faces a new battle. Eris's lie affects him deeply and reminds him of his previous life, when he isolated himself from others and gave up on moving forward. But there is one important difference. This time, he does not intend to run away. Even though he is hurting, he wants to keep moving forward. He has lost contact with the most important people in his life, but he believes that one day he will see them again. Many years have passed. Amid a gentle snowfall, a wagon travels through the wilderness carrying several adventurers. Among them is Rudeus, who still carries a deep sense of sadness. During the journey, a warrior asks why he is traveling north. At first, he avoids answering. However, the woman's companion keeps the conversation going. As he looks at the second girl, Rudeus notices a few similarities to Eris, but decides not to mention it. In the end, he explains that he is searching for his mother. The warrior then says she may have some useful information. The group continues toward the wealthy nation of Baran, a land known for its deep appreciation of magical study and practice. The following day, everyone arrives in the city. Rudeus goes his own way and rents a room for several months, planning to stay there for quite some time. It is also clear that he still has not moved on. Besides keeping a lock of red hair, he continues to protect his sacred treasure, Roxy's famous panty. Amen, brothers. Amen. Trying not to think about the redhead, he focuses all of his attention on finding Zenith. His first stop is the Adventurers Guild. There, he makes an important decision. He officially disbands the party he had formed with Eris and Rudeus. Maybe one day they will reunite. Soon after, he chooses the most dangerous quest available. The two adventurers he met earlier run into him again. Considering the risks involved, the warrior insists that he join their team. Rudeus agrees, although he realizes the offer comes more from pity than trust. The blonde archer is far from happy about the idea. To her, Rudeus looks like nothing more than an insecure and whiny rookie. Even so, she follows her leader's orders. Once the mission begins, everyone quickly realizes that the young mage is far stronger than he appears. Despite his age, his mastery of magic is impressive. They also notice how reserved he is. The leader of the group is named Suzanne, while the archer goes by Sarah. She has a difficult personality and continues to reject Rudeus's presence, even though she is forced to work with him. It reminds the protagonist of his early days with Eris, except Sarah has not tried to beat him up yet. Later, the group sets up camp and comes up with a strategy to hunt the monsters. The operation starts smoothly, but Rudeus soon realizes the enemies are much more dangerous than expected. For a moment, he nearly gives up. After all, he feels as though he has lost the motivation to keep moving forward. However, Suzanne saves him at a critical moment. Witnessing the courage and determination of his companions, a small spark of hope begins to return. When a massive horde of monsters threatens to surround the group, Rudeus unleashes a powerful explosive spell that completely wipes them out. The next morning, they spend some time skinning the defeated bears. Suzanne sincerely thanks him for saving everyone. As a sign of friendship, Rudeus offers her his hand. Suzanne returns the gesture and shows her gratitude before quickly returning to her usual serious attitude. After this experience, Rudeus decides to build a solid reputation in the city. His new journey has begun. While alone, he reflects on the loss of purpose he felt after being abandoned by Eris. Determined to move forward, he burns the lock of red hair he had kept, symbolizing his decision to mature and keep pushing ahead. Months pass. Working as an independent adventurer, Rudeus gains enough fame to earn the nickname Swamp. One day, Sarah reluctantly invites him to join a mission involving the collection of dragon scales. While exploring a series of caves, Rudeus uses his brief foresight ability and prevents Sarah from falling into a chasm. As they gather the scales, the group is ambushed by giant needlefish that use white filter. Faced with the threat, everyone decides to retreat. Everyone except Rudeus. He stays behind to fight alone. For a moment, he believes he has been abandoned, but he soon realizes the others have returned to help him. Just when the situation seems resolved, an adventurer wearing a green Tingan uniform appears. He and his subordinates easily eliminate the remaining lizards. Afterward, the man complains that the group interfered with his mission. Even so, the argument never goes beyond a few words. especially after they take all of the rewards for themselves. Watching him, Rudeus cannot help but be reminded of his father, Paul. Sometime later, he stops accompanying Sarah's group on certain missions. Then one day, the adventurers return without all of their members. They had accepted an extremely dangerous job, and Sarah, along with another adventurer, was declared missing. No one knew whether they were dead or alive. Without revealing his plans to the survivors, Rudeus sets out alone to find her. Using his magic, he temporarily changes the weather and pushes forward, defeating numerous beasts along the way. During the search, he comes across several bodies and believes they belong to the missing adventurers. However, he soon discovers the truth. A living tree had attacked the group and captured Sarah. Without wasting any time, he fights the creature, rescues the archer, and barely escapes. The two hide in a cave to recover. There, Rudeus treats her injuries. While they rest, he finds himself paying a lot of attention to Sarah's legs. At the same time, he realizes that his little buddy still is not reacting at all. Strange, very strange. Grateful for being saved, Sarah tries to get closer to him. But, as happens with so many protagonists, Rudeus fails to pick up on the hints. Even so, she no longer acts as distant and cold as before. After everything that happened, they both return home. Timothy thanks Rudeus for the rescue, and the two groups promise to help each other in the future if necessary. Later, everyone celebrates the success of their recent missions at a tavern. Rudeus's reputation continues to grow among the people of the region. Now much closer, he and Sarah spend a lot of time talking about their training and abilities. At one point, Rudeus mentions his former teacher Roxy, which sparks a bit of jealousy in Sarah. Finally, she invites him to come with her the next day to buy a new dagger. In other words, it was basically an invitation to a date. On the appointed day, the two spend time together, enjoy each other's company, and pick out a new dagger. When night falls, they end up sitting alone in a tavern. Sarah drinks more than she should, probably because she feels comfortable and safe around him. Meanwhile, Rudeus begins to realize that their relationship may be turning into something more. Since Rudeus still was not making a move, Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands and asked to accompany him back to his room. Their conversation flowed naturally, and the two grew closer and closer. Sarah was determined to take their relationship to the next level. They shared a few kisses, and everything seemed to be leading toward an even more special moment. However, when the time came, Rudeus simply could not respond. The situation completely ruined the mood between them. Hurt and frustrated, Sarah interpreted everything in the worst possible way. She believed he was only trying to repay her for the fact that she had been saved by him earlier. But we know her feelings ran much deeper than that. Unable to deal with the disappointment, she left with her feelings hurt. For Rudeus, it was yet another blow during an already difficult period of his life. His sadness grew even stronger, and he began drinking heavily. On one of those nights, he ran into Soldat again, the adventurer from the Tengen group. As usual, Soldat's companions started making fun of him, especially because of his constant smile. This time, however, Rudeus did not stay quiet. He reacted aggressively, unloading all of his pent-up frustration. During the argument, he let slip that he always smiled to avoid conflict and keep people from disliking him. Even so, he felt as though he could never earn anyone's approval. Realizing that something was seriously wrong, Soldat stopped joking around and decided to help him. He invited Rudeus out for drinks and listened to his story. After several rounds, the young mage ended up telling him everything that had happened with Sarah. After hearing the story, Soldat concluded that the problem probably was not physical. In his opinion, it was connected to some emotional trauma from the past. Putting the pieces together, he came to the conclusion that Eris's abandonment had left deep scars on Rudeus, affecting both his confidence and his ability to move forward. Determined to help, Soldat tried to find a solution. He took Rudeus to an establishment popular among adventurers, believing it might help him regain his confidence. However, nothing changed. In the end, Rudeus only talked with the attendants, and nothing came of it. When morning arrived, he was still feeling the effects of the alcohol. Soldat suggested that he should have an honest conversation with Sarah and clear up the misunderstanding. Unfortunately, Rudeus was still drunk. Without thinking, he started saying terrible things about Sarah. He claimed he did not like her, criticized her personality, and said several things he would undoubtedly regret later. Soldat tried to stop him, but it was already too late. Sarah had heard every word. Heartbroken, she walked up to him, punched Rudeus, and declared that she never wanted to see him again. Before running away in tears, she threw the dagger they had bought together during their date onto the ground. The scene left Rudeus completely devastated. Overcome by despair, he reached the point of wanting to give up on life itself, but Soldat stopped him before he could do anything reckless. Afterward, he suggested that Rudeus travel with his adventurer group for a while. During the journey, the two began speaking more openly about their failed relationships and past experiences. Little by little, Rudeus started seeing Soldat in a different light. Despite his irritating personality, he was someone who genuinely cared about his companions. Accepting the invitation, Rudeus joined the team as their offensive mage. During one of their missions, the group defeated several bears similar to those they had fought before without much difficulty. However, when they least expected it, a massive red dragon emerged from the snow. The creature was perfectly camouflaged and caught everyone by surprise. Without wasting a second, Rudeus created a smoke screen to allow his companions to escape. While they retreated, he stayed behind to face the monster alone. Thanks to his magical control, he managed to avoid the dragon's fiery attack. He then launched enormous stone projectiles that struck the creature repeatedly until its head was crushed. The victory amazed everyone on the team. From that moment on, their respect for Rudeus grew even further. By the time they reached the next city, stories of his achievements were already spreading rapidly among adventurers and locals alike. Every morning, he maintained an intense training routine. The results soon became obvious, and his physical condition improved significantly. His reputation continued to grow as well. In taverns, bards were already singing tales inspired by his battles. That was when an unexpected figure appeared. A beautiful blonde elf suddenly arrived and began watching him closely. She was the same kind-hearted elf who had been a member of Roxy's group. When they finally met, she introduced herself as Elinalize Dragonroad. Elinalize revealed that she knew Paul, Rudeus's father, and was also a friend of his former teacher, Roxy. At first, the elf showed a great deal of interest in him, but her attitude changed when she noticed the necklace he carried. The accessory looked very similar to her own. Rudeus explained that the necklace had been a gift from a childhood friend. Hearing that, Elinalize was surprised because she seemed to know Sylphiette. She also mentioned that she had no intention of causing problems between Rudeus and Roxy, but that was not the real reason for her visit. She had brought extremely important news. They had finally discovered Zenith's whereabouts. According to the information they had gathered, she was in a labyrinth-filled country called Rapan, located far from there. Roxy was also on her way to the region to search for her. Upon learning this, Rudeus felt an enormous sense of relief. His mother was alive, and he finally had a solid lead on her whereabouts. Even so, he decided to postpone the journey for a while. As the days passed, he also began learning more about Elinalize. The elf had a mysterious condition connected to a curse that required constant attention. Although the exact reason had not yet been fully explained at that point in the story, it was clear that the condition directly influenced her behavior. Some time later, an unexpected letter arrived for Rudeus. It was an official invitation from the Ranoa University of Magic, the very same institution where Sylphiette was living. After reviewing the document, he realized that the university was offering something similar to a scholarship, since it was also the place where Roxy had studied. His curiosity grew even stronger. After investigating the letter and confirming that it was genuine, Rudeus began seriously considering the offer. Around that time, his subconscious once again brought him face to face with Hitagami, the human god. During their conversation, the mysterious being claimed that searching for Zenith immediately was not the best choice. According to Hitagami, Rudeus should head to Ranoa University instead. There, he would find a solution to his most personal problem and discover new opportunities for his future. Encouraged by the possibility, the protagonist decided to follow the advice. After saying goodbye to his companions and traveling alongside Elinalize, he finally arrived at the famous university. Right at the entrance, he was greeted by the school's principal. To officially enroll as a scholarship student, he needed to demonstrate his abilities by facing one of the academy's most talented students. His opponent was none other than Fitz. Hidden behind her new identity, Sylphiette watched Rudeus nervously. After so many years, she was finally standing before him once again. However, her happiness soon turned into mild disappointment when she realized he did not recognize her. The duel began. Using his eye of foresight, Rudeus predicted his opponent's movements and cast a disruption spell that completely shut down Fitz's attack. Taking advantage of the opening, he counterattacked and won the match. Without intending to, he ended up putting Fitz in an embarrassing position in front of the spectators. To ease the situation, he pretended that he had been given an advantage and tried to downplay his victory. Shortly afterward, he was officially accepted into the university. There, he learned that scholarship students spent less time in traditional classes and focused primarily on magical research. Meanwhile, Elinolise found her own goals within the institution and began interacting with other students. On the first day, a welcoming ceremony was held. It was during this event that the new students met the student council president, Princess Ariel. Standing beside her was Fitz. Only then did Rudeus realize that the mysterious bodyguard was an important figure within the princess's inner circle. Because of that, he decided he would apologize later for what had happened during their duel. As he headed to class, he ran into several interesting faces. Among them was Zenoba, who quickly resumed expressing his admiration for his former master. From that point on, he would become one of Rudeus's most important allies within the academy. Zenoba explained the entire situation surrounding Ariel, Fitz, and their ally. Many people believed the princess was wasting her time at the university, but the truth was very different. In reality, she was hiding from enemies who wanted her dead. Later that evening, a rather awkward incident took place. A piece of underwear suddenly flew through the air, and Rudeus caught it by reflex. Several girls immediately surrounded him, believing he was some kind of pervert. The misunderstanding was only resolved when Fitz stepped in. Thanks to his position beside the princess, he quickly restored order and put an end to the commotion. Afterward, he also helped Rudeus treat a minor injury. During that moment, something strange crossed the protagonist's mind. The more he observed Fitz, the more familiar he seemed. It felt as though he had known that person for a very long time, yet he could not understand why. The days continued to pass. Rudeus adapted more and more to academic life. He studied magic, trained regularly, researched teleportation, created magical figures, and participated in various projects. Even so, he still carried several personal concerns that had not disappeared. At the same time, his friendship with Fitz gradually grew stronger. During many conversations, Fitz mentioned that he had also lost someone important after the teleportation incident. On several occasions, Sylphiette tried to hint at her true identity, but Rudeus simply could not figure it out. To him, everything seemed like nothing more than a coincidence. At one point, Fitz suggested that the two of them investigate information related to the phenomenon together. As they spent more time with each other, Rudeus became increasingly curious about the mysterious student behind the dark glasses. Meanwhile, another problem emerged. Sometime earlier, Rudeus had promised to help Zenoba create special figures. The problem was that teaching was one thing, but getting results was something entirely different. Zenoba simply was not improving as expected. Searching for a solution, Rudeus brought up the issue with Fitz. After thinking for a while, Fitz suggested finding someone with crafting talent who could assist with their project. As a result, Rudeus, Fitz, and Zenoba traveled into town to look for a suitable candidate. Upon arriving at the market, they began examining the available options. After some time, they found a young dwarf girl, around 6 years old, who had ended up in that situation because of debts accumulated by her family. As he looked at the girl, Rudeus could immediately see how much she had suffered. After insisting on speaking with her, Rudeus finally managed to hear her first words. The girl revealed that she still wanted to live. That simple answer was enough to convince him. Without hesitation, he bought her freedom, treated her injuries, gave her food, and decided to call her Julie. The reason for not using her original name was simple. In that world, dwarves usually did not receive their permanent names until they reached a certain age. Julie began living near Zenoba. At first, getting along was not easy, but little by little their relationship improved. Over time, she came to admire him greatly. In addition, Rudeus started teaching her magic without relying on traditional incantations. Meanwhile, Fitz's routine remained relatively peaceful. He trained, accompanied the princess during her daily duties, and quietly observed Rudeus's progress. No matter how busy he was, Sylphie continued thinking about him constantly. The results of Julie's training soon became apparent. She improved rapidly, and the other students started treating her like a younger sister rather than a servant. Everything seemed to be going well until disaster struck. Rudeus discovered that his precious Roxy figurine had been destroyed. Demanding an explanation, he confronted Zenoba, who told him the whole story. During a dispute with some beastfolk girls he had lost. As punishment, they destroyed the figurine. Even worse, Zenoba admitted that he had chosen to sacrifice something important to Rudeus instead of giving up something that belonged to himself. The protagonist's reaction was immediate. Determined to settle the matter, he went after those responsible. After finding them, he ended up starting a confrontation that quickly spiraled out of control. With Julie's help, he managed to capture both girls and bring them back to his dormitory. There, he explained why he was so upset and listened to their side of the story. As the discussion continued, everyone began to realize that the situation was more complicated than it first appeared. In the end, he decided to punish them without resorting to violence. When he later told Fitz what had happened, the shortened version of the story sounded extremely suspicious. From Sylphie's perspective, all she heard was that Rudeus had started a fight, captured 2 girls, and taken them back to his room. Even so, she continued trying to help him. Later, feeling sorry for the girls' situation, Rudeus and Fitz decided to end the punishment and set them free. After witnessing a more serious side of Rudeus's personality, the 2 girls began to respect him much more. Little by little, their rivalry was replaced by a friendly relationship. Before leaving, they discovered that Rudeus knew an important relative of theirs. This brought everyone even closer together. Meanwhile, Sylphie took advantage of every opportunity she could find to spend more time by his side. At one point, she was alone in his room and ended up looking through several of the items he kept there. Rudeus, meanwhile, remained curious about what Fitz was hiding behind those dark glasses. However, whenever the subject came up, he always received the same answer. Fitz could not reveal his face due to orders from above. Even so, Rudeus's curiosity only continued to grow. After the incident with the beastfolk girls, they began spending more time around Rudeus and his friends. Their presence became so constant that it eventually started to annoy Cliff. The young mage was already tired of the constant noise and the lack of peace and quiet for studying. Whenever classes ended, everyone would normally return to their dormitories. One day, however, Cliff spotted a mysterious figure through a window and was immediately captivated. Not long afterward, Rudeus found Cliff being harassed by several students and stepped in to help. Even though he hated admitting it, Cliff thanked him for the assistance. Later, Cliff himself approached Rudeus for a private conversation. There was something important he wanted to share, something related to his feelings and a certain person who had recently caught his attention. And just like that, another complicated situation began unfolding within Renoa University. Without realizing his friend's true intentions, Rudeus turned to Fitz for advice. The suggestion was simple: bring the 2 of them somewhere quiet, away from curious eyes, where they could talk without interruptions. Following the plan, Rudeus introduced Cliff to Elinalize. At first, Cliff suspected that he was somehow being tricked, but he soon realized that Rudeus was genuinely trying to help him. Before the conversation even began, Elinalize told Rudeus that she intended to reject Cliff as gently as possible. According to her, her condition and lifestyle made a normal relationship impossible. Not wanting to interfere, Rudeus decided to leave them alone and even prepared himself to comfort Cliff after the expected rejection. However, when he returned later, he found a completely different scene. Cliff and Elinalize looked happier than ever. To everyone's surprise, she had accepted his marriage proposal. The reason was simple. Cliff promised that he would find a way to help her with her curse. Moved by his sincerity, Elinalize chose to return his feelings. As a result, the 2 began a relationship that might one day lead to marriage. Autumn eventually arrives, bringing with it one of the university's traditional events. During the celebration, students participate in a variety of challenges, especially those involving the heirs of the Beastfolk clans. Much of the attention is focused on the Beastfolk princesses. As the future leaders of their people, many students hope to defeat them and gain prestige. To avoid trouble, The princesses decide to hide and come up with a very convenient solution. Since Rudeus is the strongest student among their allies, they convince him to act as their temporary bodyguard. It does not take long before challengers begin appearing, eager to test themselves against him. Among them is even a girl who seems to have some connection to Eris, although that detail is not explored further at the time. While the challenges continue, an unexpected visitor arrives at the university. It is the Demon King Batagati, Kishirika's fiancé. Despite his intimidating appearance, resembling a bizarre mix of a giant warrior and a fighting tournament character, he turns out to be far friendlier than he looks. During their conversation, Rudeus asks whether he knows anything about Hitagami, the human god. Batagati gives a vague answer without revealing anything truly useful. Shortly afterward, Fitz arrives carrying the Demon King's staff. Before the duel begins, both sides agree on certain conditions. Rudeus promises to spare his opponent if he wins. Batagati, meanwhile, demands that the decisive blow be delivered in a single attack. The battle begins. Using a powerful drill-shaped magic spell, Rudeus unleashes a devastating attack that strikes the Demon King head-on. The impact is so impressive that it almost seems enough to defeat him instantly. In the end, Rudeus is declared the winner. As a sign of respect, Batagati delivers a monumental punch straight to his face. Fortunately, it is merely his unusual way of expressing friendship. Soon afterward, Fitz heals Rudeus's injuries. To everyone's surprise, Batagati shows up at the university again the following day, this time as a student. From that point on, he frequently spends time with Rudeus. The months continue to pass. While Sylphiette keeps thinking about Rudeus constantly, he spends much of his time with Zenoba, the Beastfolk girls, and his other friends. This only makes her more restless. At the same time, research into the teleportation phenomenon continues to progress. During his studies, Rudeus concludes that the incident shares similarities with summoning techniques. Seeking more specialized answers, Fitz introduces him to a famous researcher at the university. The researcher is a young woman known for introducing numerous unusual ideas into the institution, concepts that closely resemble technologies and customs from Earth. The moment Rudeus sees her, he is completely stunned. She is the exact same masked girl he previously encountered alongside Orsted, the dragon god. The shock is so overwhelming that he faints on the spot. When he wakes up, he realizes that Fitz has been taking care of him. Not long afterward, he meets the mysterious masked girl once again. Concerned, he immediately asks whether Orsted is nearby. She assures him that he is not. Only then does Rudeus finally relax. The young woman shows him two names written in kanji and asks if he can read them. When he answers correctly, she confirms what she had suspected all along. Without hesitation, she begins speaking Japanese. She then removes her mask and finally introduces herself. Her real name is Shizuka Nanahoshi. Just like Rudeus, she came from Japan. More than that, she was one of the people involved in the incident that occurred during the final moments of his previous life. It was also Nanahoshi who had sent the letter inviting Rudeus to study at Renoa. Discovering that there is another person from Earth in this world leaves Rudeus deeply surprised. Nanahoshi then explains her situation. Unlike him, she was not reincarnated. She was transported directly into this world with the same body she had before. Because of that, she does not age normally. Her greatest goal remains finding a way to return to Japan. She still has family and friends waiting for her in her original world. On the other hand, Rudeus admits that he does not share the same desire. Despite retaining memories of his previous life, he has built a new life in this world, formed important bonds, and has no intention of abandoning them. Even so, he decides to help her. Nanahoshi needs to continue her research, using Rudeus's enormous mana reserves as support. Agreeing to cooperate in the future, the two go their separate ways for the time being. Before parting, Rudeus thanks Fitz for always being by his side and for showing so much concern for him. Those words leave Sylphiette even more emotionally affected than before. Time continues to move forward. Nearly a full year passes since Rudeus arrived at the university. At one point, Sylphiette even accuses Nanahoshi of being responsible for the suffering of countless people. However, after giving the matter more thought, everyone realizes that Nanahoshi may have been just another victim of the situation. Another contradiction also emerges. Hitagami had presented one version of events, while Orsted apparently offered a completely different one. This means that someone is not telling the entire truth. In search of answers, Nanahoshi explains that there are ancient magical structures connected to summoning that may hold the key to solving the mystery. She also believes that someone intentionally brought her into this world. However, she avoids discussing certain details because she fears altering important future events. Rudeus begins training in physical combat with Batagati, steadily improving his skills and becoming stronger and stronger. Meanwhile, Nanahoshi conducts countless experiments in an attempt to recreate a method of traveling between worlds. So far, none of them have produced the results she is looking for. Juliet continues to improve as well. Her doll-making skills keep getting better, and her work is already producing impressive results. One day, Soldat and his companions visit the city again and invite Rudeus out for drinks and conversation. As for Cliff and Alinalise, their relationship continues to progress relatively smoothly. Later, while walking through the market, Rudeus spots Fitz accompanied by the princess's other guard. Excited, he approaches to talk. However, after taking a closer look, he notices that something about Fitz's appearance seems different from before. Apparently, Sylphie is not happy with Rudeus at all. From her perspective, he spends more time with his friends than with her. Meanwhile, the protagonist, unable to stop thinking about the person he is truly interested in, comes up with an excuse to visit the library in hopes of running into them. When they finally meet, Rudeus asks why Fitz has been avoiding him, trying to dodge a difficult conversation. Fitz replies that work has been keeping him busy and that maybe the two of them need a little more distance. Things become so awkward that it almost feels as though one of the strongest friendships at the university is coming to an end. Later that same night, Rudeus tries to create a doll modeled after Fitz. During the process, however, Zenoba unintentionally recognizes who it is supposed to be. At that moment, a difficult truth forms in Rudeus's mind. He is in love with his friend. The realization leaves him completely lost, since he never imagined he could feel that way about another man. Confused, he decides to seek out a professor and find out Fitz's true gender. However, the professor refuses to answer because he has been ordered to keep it a secret. Rather than clearing things up, this only leaves Rudeus even more confused. Over the following days, he can barely focus. Even while sitting in the library, his thoughts constantly drift back to Fitz. At one point, while he is distracted, Fitz suddenly appears and accidentally trips on top of him. The two fall unexpectedly, and during the confusion, Rudeus realizes something important. After the incident, he finally concludes that the person standing before him is actually a woman. Embarrassed, Fitz immediately runs away. At that moment, everything starts to make sense to the protagonist. He understands why Hitagami guided him to the university. The goal was to reunite him with a childhood friend who had been hiding her true identity behind the appearance of a boy. Now he finally understands the whole situation. With that, the final arc of this first part of the story begins. Rudeus is extremely happy to have cleared up his doubts, and because his personal problem seems to be improving. At the same time, Sylphie also feels relieved. Now that Rudeus knows the truth, she seriously considers revealing who she really is. Even so, several fears continue to trouble her. What if he does not feel the same way about her? What if he has forgotten the promise they made as children to attend the same university and build a future together? Noticing her friend's insecurity, Ariel decides to help. To begin with, the two talk about the past. Sylphie remembers the days when she was rejected by the people in her village and how Rudeus came to her aid. Back then, she actually thought he was a girl until she unexpectedly learned the truth. Interestingly, the current situation is very similar to that experience. Afterward, Ariel asks what exactly Sylphie hopes to achieve from this reunion. Without hesitation, Sylphie answers that she wants to become Rudeus's girlfriend. She then describes in detail how she imagines everything will happen. They will meet in a quiet place. She will remove her glasses. They will embrace, confess their feeling, and from there their relationship will naturally move forward. During the conversation, Sylphie reveals that she dreams of building a family with him, and even mentions that she would like to have many children. Seeing how excited her friend has become, Ariel tells her to calm down and organize her thoughts. Then the plan is put into action. Disguised as Fitz, Sylphie invites Rudeus on a walk. Just the two of them. Since he trusts her, he accepts without hesitation. Together, they travel to a remote area outside the city, a safe location with no monsters nearby. At one point, Sylphiette asks to borrow Rudeus's staff. Her goal is to create a storm that he will not be able to dispel easily. As the rain grows heavier, the two become completely soaked and are forced to look for shelter. Before long, they find a cave where they can dry off. Inside, Rudeus acts naturally, but he notices that his companion is extremely nervous, wanting to respect her boundaries. He gives her space to feel comfortable. However, shortly afterward, she asks for his help herself. The situation ends up reminding both of them of an important moment from their childhood. In the end, only one detail remains: the glasses. When Ruddy removes them, he finally sees Fitz's eyes clearly and realizes that the person before him has always been his childhood friend, Sylphiette. The reunion deeply moves both of them. They embrace, and unable to hide his feelings any longer, Rudeus tells her that he loves her. From that point on, they talk about everything that happened during the years they spent apart. Since they are unable to enjoy the moment the way they originally imagined, Sylphiette decides to tell him her entire story. She explains why her hair changed color, why she adopted a male identity, and the constant fear that Rudeus had forgotten her. At the end of the conversation, they leave together, now officially boyfriend and girlfriend. After returning to the academy, Sylphiette tells Ariel everything that happened. The princess responds with a few teasing remarks aimed at Rudeus, but Luke quickly steps in. Despite his usual jokes, he understands that the matter is serious and asks Ariel to stop making fun of the situation. Without wasting any time, Luke obtains some medicine to help the protagonist. In addition, Ariel offers a few pieces of relationship advice. During this period, another interesting detail comes up. Many people might assume that Luke has feelings for Sylphiette, but that is not the case. He explains that his preferences are completely different and jokingly says that it is a family tradition. Finally, the decisive moment arrives. Sylphiette visits Rudeus's room and brings the medicine with her. Because of her nervousness, she ends up taking a dose as well. The two grow closer and closer, and after a heartfelt conversation, they strengthen their relationship even further. The story does not show the details of what happens afterward, but it is clear that the two spend the night together. The next morning, Rudeus wakes up and realizes that Sylphiette is nowhere to be seen. For a brief moment, he fears that he has been abandoned once again. However, she soon returns and reassures him that she has no intention of leaving him. Her words bring immense relief to the protagonist. Some time later, Rudeus meets Princess Ariel. Recognizing his abilities, she asks for his help with matters involving the kingdom of Asura and the struggle for the royal succession. Since Sylphiette is one of her most important allies, Rudeus agrees to assist her. Before that, however, he makes an important announcement. From that moment on, Sylphiette will be his future wife. With that, the two officially become engaged, bringing the first part of Season 2 to a close. When the story continues, we see a completely different Rudeus. After reuniting with Sylphiette, he regains his confidence and leaves behind much of the sadness he had carried for so long. His excitement is so great that he constantly talks about romance, even with Nanahoshi. The problem is that she had argued with her boyfriend before arriving in that world, making the topic somewhat uncomfortable for her. Even so, Rudeus keeps sharing his happiness. We also learn that Nanahoshi left someone waiting for her back in Japan. However, considering everything that has happened so far, no one knows whether that reunion will ever be possible. Meanwhile, Rudeus begins researching how marriage works in that world. During his search, he realizes that he needs to find a suitable house to start his new life. Determined to save money, he decides to look for a large, inexpensive mansion that is preferably abandoned. After some time, he finds exactly what he is looking for. The only problem is that the mansion is rumored to be haunted. Undeterred, he brings his friends Zenoba and Cliff along to investigate the property. They spend hours examining every room but find nothing suspicious. Since the search produces no results, they decide to stay there overnight. Late in the night, they notice signs of a strange presence moving through the mansion. Realizing that the creature had been waiting for them to fall asleep, the three begin a hunt through every hallway. After a lengthy search, they discover the source of the mysterious events. It is a terrifying doll powered by an unusual form of magic. Working together, they manage to neutralize the creature and finally solve the mansion's mystery. Their investigation reveals that the doll was created in a hidden laboratory inside the mansion. At some point, however, the place was completely abandoned, most likely because something happened to the person conducting the research. As a result, the property is now free to be used once again. As he looks around, Rudeus begins to imagine how many possibilities there would be if he could reproduce that technology. Naturally, one of the first ideas that comes to mind involves creating extremely affectionate dolls. Zenoba, who shows tremendous interest in that kind of creation, asks for permission to keep both the doll and the laboratory. His goal is to study the magic used in it and discover ways to make it useful for Rudeus's projects. Meanwhile, the protagonist prepares a special surprise for Sylphie. After restoring the mansion, he turns it into a true home for the two of them. Even the decorations include details inspired by the green color her hair once had. From that moment on, they intend to live together as husband and wife, building a peaceful life under the same roof. To celebrate this new chapter, they follow a tradition that is quite common among newlyweds and organize a large party. Before that, they go shopping for food for the banquet and take the opportunity to update part of Rudeus's wardrobe. Thanks to their connections, they receive excellent discounts because they are acquaintances of Luke, one of Princess Ariel's bodyguards. Even while living through such a happy moment, Rudeus still carries some insecurities. He fears that he may not be able to become the ideal husband for Sylphie, in her opinion. However, he is already exactly the person she has always wanted by her side. Eventually, the day of the celebration arrives. The couple invites nearly all of their friends and acquaintances. Among the guests are the Beastfolk girls, Nanahoshi, Ariel, Luke, Linnea, Persina, Zenoba, Julie, and many other characters who were part of their earlier journey. During the party, Rudeus and Sylphie decide to clear up a few misunderstandings. First, they explain that Sylphie was not a man, as many had believed during her time as Fitz. Then, they officially announce that they are getting married. The news is met with enthusiasm, and everyone spends the rest of the day celebrating the couple's future and the opening of their new home. However, an unexpected event captures everyone's attention. Suddenly, Ilinalise begins to cry and reveals a shocking truth. She is Sylphie's grandmother. The revelation leaves everyone stunned. For a long time, this remained a secret because of the complicated curse that affects Ilinalise. Fearing that she would bring shame upon her relatives, she distanced herself from her entire family, including her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Once the connection between the two becomes clear, many pieces finally fall into place. After all, both of them carried similar items, suggesting that some kind of family connection existed. While Sylphie and Ilinalise speak privately to clear everything up, Rudeus continues hosting the remaining guests. Among them is Ariel. Before leaving, the princess asks Luke and Rudeus to have a friendly sword duel. Without much difficulty, the protagonist wins the match. Afterward, Ariel admits that she only wanted to confirm that Sylphie was with someone trustworthy. Although she still dreams of returning to her homeland to compete for the throne, she wants Sylphie to be happy alongside Rudeus. However, she makes it clear that if he ever abandons her friend, she intends to bring Sylphie back to continue serving as her bodyguard. Later, Cliff talks with Rudeus about his relationship with Ilinalise. Many people would assume that he would give up on the relationship because of the problems caused by her curse. However, Cliff says the exact opposite. To him, Ilinalise is the perfect partner, and he intends to face any obstacle by her side. Seeing his friend's determination, Rudeus reflects on his own feeling. He concludes that he will do everything in his power to continue deserving Sylphie's love. Some time later, a letter arrives from Paul. In it, Rudeus's father explains that his team is preparing to travel to the dangerous Bigaret continent to rescue Zenith. Since the mission involves many risks, he decides to send Aisha and Norn to live temporarily with their older brother. Aisha is extremely intelligent and full of energy, while Norn still struggles to connect with other people. As a result, Rudeus has to inform Sylphie that his sisters will be moving in with them. Fortunately, she takes the news quite calmly. While waiting for the girls to arrive, the couple spends their time exchanging magical knowledge. Sylphie wants to learn nullification magic, while Rudeus is interested in improving his healing techniques. During their training sessions, the two end up talking about the future and the possibility of having children. At that moment, a concern arises. Since both of them possess unusual magical talents, They wonder whether their future children would inherit those traits. However, there is another important detail. Elves generally have a harder time having children. This helps explain some situations involving linealize. Because of that uncertainty, Sylphiette even suggests alternatives to increase their chances of starting a family. Even so, Rudeus reaffirms that he intends to stay by her side and remain faithful to the relationship they have built together. Meanwhile, Nanahoshi continues her research in search of a way to return to Japan. After weeks of intense work, she finally creates a magic circle capable of transporting objects between different worlds. However, when she tries to activate it for the first time, the experiment fails. Although she pretends everything is fine, frustration overwhelms her once she is alone. Rudeus notices how exhausted she is and decides to help her rest and recover her energy. Sometime later, Nanahoshi explains to the other researchers that the symbols within magic circles function similarly to complex circuits. Any mistake in their construction can compromise the final result. After understanding the theory, Rudeus gathers Zenoba, Cliff, Ariel, and Julie to work together on a solution. During the discussion, Zenoba mentions that the doll found in the mansion contained countless overlapping magical patterns. The combination of those layers was exactly what allowed it to function. Inspired by this discovery, the group spends several days conducting tests. In the end, they manage to create 3 different magic circles and combine them into a single, much more efficient design. When they present the results to Nanahoshi, she finally finds the clues she had been searching for. After countless adjustments, the experiment is activated once again. This time, a small object appears before them, a plastic bottle brought directly from Japan. The result is not perfect, but it represents a huge breakthrough. If they can improve the method, it may one day become possible to transport people between the 2 worlds, although doing so would require an enormous amount of mana. Excited by the achievement, everyone decides to celebrate together. The success completely renews Nanahoshi's hope of returning home someday. Not long afterward, the day finally arrives when Aisha and Norn reach Rudeus's home. Since they are still young, they are accompanied by Rudeus, who returns to the story after a long absence. During their conversation, he talks a little about his travels and mentions that he happened to meet Roxy at one point. Without realizing it, he also touches on a sensitive subject by asking about Eris. After hearing everything that happened between them, Rudeus comments that Eris always had trouble expressing her feelings and believes that she probably had her own reasons for leaving. Although Rudeus is happy with Sylphiette, it is still clear that some memories of that abandonment continue to hurt him. The following morning, Rudeus plans to leave early. However, before he can depart, he ends up encountering King Batagati. The two immediately stare each other down with obvious tension, the result of events connected to old conflicts from the past. Fortunately, the situation never gets out of control. Once tempers cool down, Rudeus takes the opportunity to convince Rudeus to stay a little longer and share breakfast with everyone. When it is finally time to say goodbye, Norn surprises everyone by asking to accompany Rudeus on his journey. She still cannot fully trust either Rudeus or Sylphiette and believes that leaving would be the best option. However, the warrior manages to convince her to stay and face her problems instead of running away from them. With that settled, another issue arises. Paul had left clear instructions in his letter. Both girls were supposed to study. The problem was that neither of them showed any interest in the idea. Aisha claimed that she preferred helping around the house and taking care of household chores, while Norn seemed uninterested in doing anything that would bring her closer to her brother. To settle the matter, Rudeus decides to give them an entrance exam. The goal is to determine each of their academic levels before making a decision. The results could not have been more different. Aisha earns the highest score of all the evaluations, while Norn finishes with the lowest score. Because of that, Rudeus allows Aisha to choose her own path, while deciding that Norn will attend the university. However, she agrees only under one condition. She does not want to live in the mansion. Instead, she intends to stay in the student dormitories. Although he hesitates at first, he eventually agrees. Aisha is outraged. From her perspective, Norn is being rewarded despite achieving the worst result. At one point, she even asks whether the different treatment is because she is not Rudeus's blood-related sister, since she is Lilia's daughter. The protagonist explains that there is no favoritism. and that his decisions are based solely on what he believes is best for each of them. With that settled, the two begin their new routine. Aisha starts helping Sylphie with household duties, while Norn begins her life at the university. However, after a month passes, Rudeus notices something concerning. His sister still has not managed to make any friends. While he is thinking about how to help her, Linnea and Persina show up carrying a mysterious bag. They explain that they spent an entire month preparing that gift especially for him and insist that he open it alone once he gets home, before he can discover what is inside. Luke calls him to deal with another problem. He soon learns that the gift prepared by the two girls consists of women's underwear. Having absolutely no interest in it, he makes it clear that he does not need gifts like that since he is happy with his wife. He then returns everything and demands that they stop causing trouble. During the conversation, he realizes that they have also been bothering Norn. He immediately orders them to leave his sister alone. The two agree without argument. Even so, Norn's problems continue. As the days pass, she becomes increasingly isolated, eventually spending long periods locked in her room. The situation brings back painful memories from Rudeus's previous life, fearing that something similar may be happening to her. He drops everything and rushes to find out the reason. However, the truth is very different. Norn's suffering is not caused by bullying or harassment. The problem is that everyone around her constantly compares her to her brother. Everywhere she goes, she hears stories about the brilliant student, the exceptional mage, and the hero admired throughout the academy. Feeling as though she is always living in his shadow, she gradually develops a deep sense of inferiority. Determined to help her, Rudeus comes up with a plan with the assistance of his friends. That night, Ariel makes a public announcement that conveniently provides easier access to the girls' dormitory. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Linnea and Persina hide Rudeus inside a laundry cart so he can reach Norn's room without attracting attention. There, the two share an extremely important conversation. Rudeus remembers his days in Japan. Back then, he had also isolated himself from the world after experiencing numerous problems at school. His brother repeatedly tried to help him, but he always rejected every attempt to get close. As time passed, those efforts eventually stopped, and they drifted apart. Now, the situation has completely reversed. Meanwhile, Norn reflects on the reasons she carried so much resentment. Her earliest memory of Rudeus is seeing him stand up to Paul, someone she deeply admired. In addition, while her father worked tirelessly to search for Zenith, it seemed to her that Rudeus was off having adventures and meeting new people without worrying about the rest of the family. At the same time, she eventually saw something in him that reminded her of their father. From that moment on, the two began rebuilding the relationship they had never truly shared. The experience also causes Rudeus to reflect on his own regrets. Unlike Norn, he was never able to fully resolve the conflicts he carried from his previous life. Because of that, he begins to think that if Nanahoshi ever manages to return to Japan, he might find a way to correct some of those mistakes. Throughout all this time, Norn was dealing with another problem as well. Everyone spoke highly of Rudeus. Ruigerd respected him, the professors admired him, and the students praised him. The more she heard these stories, the harder it became to reconcile that image with the one she carried in her mind. Sometime later, wonderful news reaches the family. Sylphie is pregnant, happiness fills the household, and both she and Rudeus are incredibly excited about the arrival of their baby. For a while, everything seems perfect. Rudeus manages to balance his studies, friends, family, and personal goals. However, that peace comes to an end when he receives a letter from Geese. In the message, Geese explains that the mission to rescue Zenith on the Bigaret continent has run into serious difficulties. The situation has become dangerous, and they urgently need help. The news forces Rudeus to face an extremely difficult decision. He remembers Hitagami's warning that traveling to that continent would bring him regret. Even so, staying behind also feels wrong. If he goes to help, he will miss important moments with Sylphie during her pregnancy. If he stays, he risks losing Paul, Zenith, and the rest of the expedition members. Unsure of what to do, he seeks advice from all of his close friends. Each person offers a different opinion, but the choice remains his alone. The final decision comes when Norn decides to take matters into her own hands. Determined to help her parents, she plans to travel to Bigaret by herself. When Rudeus realizes that his sister is willing to face such danger without considering the consequences, he understands that he cannot remain idle. Even knowing that the journey could take many months, he decides to leave and save his family. As he prepares for the trip, he informs everyone about his long absence. Upon hearing the news, Nanahoshi shares an important piece of information. There are ancient teleportation circles hidden throughout the world that can drastically reduce travel time. She then reveals the location of one of them, hidden within a nearby forest. In addition, the university's principal provides several books about Bigaret so that Rudeus can study the region before departing. Elinolise also decides to accompany him on the mission. Before the journey, she considers ending her relationship with Cliff because of the long separation ahead. However, Cliff once again demonstrates his determination. He tells her that he will continue waiting for her and that their relationship can simply be put on hold until she returns. With all the preparations complete, the great journey to the Bigaret continent is finally about to begin. Following the information provided by Nanahoshi, they headed toward a forest where a teleportation circle was supposedly located. After searching for a while, they found ruins hidden among the vegetation, and inside them was exactly what they were looking for, a portal capable of taking them to Bigaret. The journey happened almost instantly. One moment they were standing in the forest, and the next they appeared in another set of ruins, this time surrounded by a vast desert. The place looked very similar to the previous location. Later, while resting beside the campfire, Rudeus found himself remembering how beautiful Elinolise was because of the effects of the curse she carried. Even so, out of respect for his wife, Sylphiette, he managed to control his impulses, at least for a while. Shortly afterward, he tried to distract himself by looking elsewhere, when he noticed an extremely beautiful woman passing through the area. The situation seemed suspicious from the start, and it did not take long for the truth to come out. The woman was a succubus, a type of demon known specifically for its ability to seduce people. Fortunately, Elinolise arrived at just the right moment and prevented the situation from becoming a bigger problem. The difficult part was that afterward, the protagonist felt an even stronger urge to keep looking for trouble. Later, the pair reached the top of a massive cliff. The problem was that two griffins chose that exact moment to appear. The solution was simple. Defeat the creatures before they could cause greater problems. Once the monsters were eliminated, they continued their journey and finally arrived in Reborn, where they reunited with Paul and the rest of the group. Their first destination was the local guild. At least one important part of the mission had been accomplished, since everyone had successfully made it there. Even so, Paul was far from cheerful. He showed clear signs of discouragement and could not stop blaming himself for failing to achieve any concrete results during the search. It was also at this point that Rudeus met Talhand, the dwarf who had become his father's newest traveling companion. The main objective remained finding Zenith, who was still missing somewhere inside the labyrinth. However, there was another equally urgent problem. Roxy was trapped inside as well, and no one had been able to find her for an entire month. Naturally, that was enough to ignite all of Rudeus's motivation. Rather than focusing his thoughts on his missing mother, he became even more determined to find his teacher. Yes, his former mentor. Without wasting any time, everyone immediately headed into the labyrinth. They soon discovered that the place had already been documented in one of the books Rudeus possessed. Using the information from the book, Paul's group realized they had already made considerable progress. Even so, the exploration continued. After defeating numerous monsters, they reached a new layer of the labyrinth while keeping their focus on finding Roxy. That was when something strange happened. Although no one had any clues about her location, Rudeus sensed a presence behind a wall. Convinced that something was there, he decided to destroy it. On the other side, he found his former teacher. She was in a desperate situation, surrounded by countless monsters that continuously emerged from nearby summoning circles. Without hesitation, Rudeus froze the entire area, including the circles themselves, preventing more creatures from appearing and saving his teacher. The long-awaited reunion had finally happened, but there was one unexpected detail. Roxy did not recognize Rudeus right away. His reaction was so intense that his stomach could not handle it, and he ended up getting sick. The mixture of happiness from finding her and frustration at not being recognized was simply too much to bear in that moment. Even so, the most important thing was that Roxy was alive and safe. With the mission completed, everyone returned to the city. Since she had survived alone inside the labyrinth for an entire month, they decided to give her a few days to rest and recover completely. During that time, they handed her the book about the labyrinth so she could study it as thoroughly as possible. After evaluating the situation, they decided to launch another expedition a few days later. Technically, it would have been better to wait longer, but the beliefs of that world held that anyone who had nearly died inside a labyrinth should return quickly so they would not lose their momentum. As preparations continued, Rudeus spent more time alongside his former teacher. The team continued advancing and defeating every enemy that appeared in their path. In addition, Rudeus had become far more powerful than before, making the group even more efficient. The only inconvenience was the constant need to return to the city to purchase more potions, scrolls, and other supplies. During one of those trips back, Roxy and Rudeus took the opportunity to catch up. She explained that she had been helping Paul search for Zenith because she was deeply grateful for everything he and his family had done for her in the past. In turn, the teacher thanked Rudeus for being an important influence in her life. According to her, without that encounter, she never would have gained enough experience to reach the rank of King-class mage. After that pleasant conversation, the group returned to the labyrinth once again. They reached the end of the fourth stratum and discovered a massive chamber filled with portals. The theory was simple. Only one of them led to the correct path. The problem was figuring out which one. Rudeus analyzed the situation and realized something felt off. The route ahead seemed far too easy. While he was thinking about it, Paul decided to give his son some unusual advice. He said that he used to carry only one sword, but now he preferred using two. The message had nothing to do with combat. After observing Rudeus's behavior around Roxy, he was clearly suggesting that his son consider taking her as a second wife. Meanwhile, Rudeus remained focused on the labyrinth. After taking a closer look at the surroundings, he realized the place was very similar to the ruins connected to the teleportation portals they had encountered before. With that in mind, he asked Geese to search for a hidden passage. The search paid off. They discovered a secret staircase leading to the real portal. Before going through it, everyone carefully prepared themselves, organizing spells, equipment, and charms for whatever threat might be waiting ahead. When they finally stepped through the portal, they arrived in a massive boss chamber. At the center stood a gigantic scaled hydra guarding a crystal, and inside that crystal was the very person they had been searching for, Zenith. The moment Paul saw Zenith trapped inside the crystal, he completely lost his composure. Without a second thought, he charged straight at the hydra, determined to free his wife. The problem was that the creature was far from a simple opponent. Any magic cast from a distance vanished before it could even reach the monster, as if its scales were canceling the spells themselves. On top of that, every head Paul cut off grew back within moments. Realizing how dangerous the situation was, Roxy suggested a temporary retreat so they could rethink their strategy. Paul, however, had already gone beyond reason and continued pressing the attack. With no other choice, the others forcibly dragged him back through the portal. His reaction could not have been worse. Paul was furious that they had pulled him out of the fight without Zenith. Things only got worse when Rudeus questioned whether she was even alive, since she remained completely motionless inside the crystal. That comment hit Paul hard. To him, his son seemed far too cold about the situation. While he was desperate to save his wife, Rudeus showed none of that same emotional intensity on the surface. The protagonist understood why his father was angry, but he also knew that acting on impulse would solve nothing. In fact, he began wondering why he did not feel the same attachment. It had been a very long time since he had lived with his mother, and that distance had weakened part of the emotional bond they once shared. While they tried to calm Paul down, the group began discussing possible ways to defeat the Hydra. Elinolise mentioned that she had seen someone with symptoms similar to Zenith's and assured everyone that Zenith was still alive, although she was clearly leaving out some details. Roxy then shared an important piece of information. According to the records in the book, the Hydra's scales absorbed mana. That explained why spells cast from a distance disappeared before causing any damage. However, close-range magic attacks could still work because there would not be enough time for complete absorption. Even so, the biggest problem remained: regeneration. The heads kept growing back every time they were cut off. That was when Rudeus remembered an old story about Hercules fighting a hydra. According to the legend, the hero prevented regeneration by cauterizing the wounds immediately after severing the heads. The idea seemed simple, but it might have been exactly what they needed. With a strategy in place, everyone prepared to return to the battlefield. Before they went back in, Paul did something unexpected. He thanked everyone for their help and then made a request of Rudeus. If anything happened to him, his son had to save Zenith no matter the cost. It may have seemed like an enormous burden to place on someone's shoulders, but Paul only made that request because he fully believed in his son's abilities. Shortly afterward, the group passed through the portal once again. The battle resumed immediately. Paul and Alinolise took the front line, cutting off the Hydra's heads at close range. Right behind them, Rudeus used his magic to cauterize the wounds before regeneration could occur. Roxy provided support with healing magic, while Geese and Talhand helped keep the battle under control. The strategy worked. One head fell, then another, and another. However, the Hydra was not only durable but intelligent as well. At one point, Rudeus realized the monster was shedding the burned tissue and replacing it with new flesh, allowing the heads to grow back once again. That forced everyone to pick up the pace. Without letting up, they continued attacking. Then the creature opened all of its mouths at the same time and prepared a massive breath attack. The scene looked very much like something out of a giant monster movie. Recognizing the danger, everyone ran behind Rudeus and used his defenses as protection. The attack was blocked. Soon afterward, 2 more heads were destroyed. Only one remained. That was when everything started to go wrong. Rudeus lost focus for a moment, and Paul threw himself in front of an attack to save him. Shortly afterward, the same thing happened again. Once more, Paul prevented his son from being struck. The battle had reached its decisive moment. With the last head still standing, Rudeus charged forward, even using his own arm to create an opening. Finally, Paul seized the opportunity and delivered the finishing blow. The Hydra collapsed. Victory had been achieved. Zenith had been saved, but the cost was far too high. The first problem was that Rudeus lost an arm during the battle. That alone would have been terrible. However, something even worse happened. The mistakes made during the fight ended up costing Paul his life. Yes, Paul died. Even though they managed to rescue Zenith, no one felt any joy. The atmosphere was far from victorious. When they returned to the city, they brought both Zenith and Paul's body with them. Not long afterward, a funeral was held. Zenith remains unconscious for 4 full days. When she finally wakes up, another tragedy emerges. She cannot speak, does not recognize anyone, and appears to have completely lost her memory. Her condition is practically catatonic. Meanwhile, Rudeus sinks deeper and deeper into guilt. Paul's death brings back painful memories from his previous life. He remembers how he treated his parents back then, the lack of affection he felt toward them, and even the fact that he never attended their funerals when they died. All of those memories come flooding back at once, making his suffering even worse. Seeing the state he is in, Roxy tries to help him. She says she understands his pain and stays by his side whenever he needs someone to listen. Little by little, the two grow closer until she eventually crosses certain boundaries. The next day, after having an honest conversation with his former teacher, Rudeus asks for advice on what he should do moving forward. Her answer is simple: he should take care of his family. Meanwhile, Lilia takes responsibility for looking after Zenith. Although her body and brain continue functioning, she does not speak, show recognition, or take care of herself. According to Alinolise's knowledge, there may not be a cure for her condition. Even so, Lilia decides to remain by Zenith's side out of respect for Paul's memory. With everything settled as well as possible, the group begins the long journey back through the desert toward the portal ruin. During one of the nights at camp, Roxy and Rudeus once again talk about everything that happened. Rudeus explains that he does not want to betray Sylphiette and speaks about the family waiting for him at home. Roxy admits that she knew that from the very beginning and acknowledges that she took advantage of him while he was emotionally vulnerable. At the same time, he reveals something he had been keeping to himself. From the moment he found her in the labyrinth, he fell in love with her all over again. That explains much of the strange behavior he had been showing. Even so, Roxy continues suggesting that he could leave his current life behind and stay with her instead. The journey continues until they finally reach the forest where the first portal was located. On the last night before arriving at the mansion, Alinalise speaks with Rudeus. She explains that people like Cliff, who follow the Millie's faith, deeply value the idea of staying with only one person for their entire lives. However, since neither he nor Sylphie follows those beliefs, Paul's words begin to make sense within their reality. For that reason, she suggests that Rudeus consider making Roxy his second wife. The idea begins to occupy his thoughts. Roxy clearly likes the possibility, but she makes it clear that she would only accept if Sylphie agreed. Little by little, Rudeus realizes that he is beginning to understand some of Paul's actions that he once criticized. Now he loves both Sylphie and his former teacher and wants to see them happy. Conveniently, that conclusion solves many problems for him. Eventually, the protagonist returns home. Throughout the entire journey, one concern never left his mind. Before he departed, Hitagami had claimed that he would regret setting out on that journey to save his mother. Because of that, when Rudeus walks through the mansion doors, he is almost overcome with panic. For a few moments, he cannot find anyone. Then he spots Aisha and Sylphiette. Sylphie is already showing a small baby bump. Immediately, he asks about his friends. Sylphie tells him that everyone is fine. The relief is immediate. They welcome him home, and for a moment everything seems peaceful. But that raises another question. Where exactly is the regret that Hitagami mentioned? Could there be something Rudeus still has not discovered? Perhaps that man is hiding something far darker than he appears. In any case, that can wait. The family must first deal with a far more urgent matter: Paul's death. Norn is overjoyed to see her mother again, but all of that happiness disappears when she learns that her father did not return. She immediately breaks down in tears. The scene is painful to watch. For a moment, it seems like she is about to completely lose control. However, when she notices Rudeus's missing arm, she understands that he also paid a tremendous price during that mission. If he had not gone there, perhaps no one would have been able to save Zenith. Shortly afterward, Norn takes the sword that once belonged to her father. Rudeus allows it but offers a warning. A sword must have a purpose. A true warrior uses it to protect the people they love. It was exactly the kind of lesson Paul used to repeat. In time, Paul's companions also say their goodbyes. The beastman praises Rudeus for his efforts. The dwarf advises him not to surrender to grief and to keep moving forward. Later, attention turns to Cliff, who appears while gently rubbing his wife's belly. The sight immediately raises a question. Is she pregnant? And more importantly, is the baby really Cliff's? Finally, with no visitors around, the family discusses a delicate subject: the possibility of Roxy becoming Rudeus's second wife. The only person completely opposed to the idea is Norn. As a devoted follower of the teachings of Millie's, she believes that having two wives is a sin. On top of that, she harshly scolds Rudeus for being unfaithful. While Sylphie spent months worrying about where he was, she then directs her anger toward Roxy, accusing her of taking advantage of her brother during one of the most difficult periods of his life. Faced with that reaction, Roxy decides to leave. However, just as she is about to walk away, Sylphie stops her. With tears gathering in her eyes, she refuses to let the mage take another step. Sylphie then begins explaining everything she knows about Roxy. She talks about her accomplishments and how much she had heard about her over the years. After all, throughout countless conversations and encounters, Rudeus never failed to mention his former teacher. It was obvious to anyone that Roxy held a special place in his heart. She was the mage he admired and respected more than anyone else. At first, this made Sylphie somewhat jealous. It was difficult to constantly hear about another woman. However, as she got to know Roxy better, her perspective began to change. Little by little, she realized that the two of them had far more in common than she had imagined. Both loved Rudeus deeply and felt there was still so much about him left to discover. In a way, they shared the same desire to learn more about the person they had chosen to build their lives with. And so, after everything that happened, Roxy officially becomes Rudeus's second wife. The story then presents several calm and emotional moments. In one scene, Norn is shown training intensely with a sword. Her frustration is still obvious, mainly because Rudeus continues choosing a path that goes against the teachings of her religion. Even so, as time passes, she begins to remember that her own father, Paul, also had 2 wives. One of them was her sister's mother, someone she cares about deeply. That memory makes the situation a little harder for her to judge. Meanwhile, Roxy and Sylphiette discuss the wedding preparations. However, Roxy prefers to wait a little longer. In her opinion, it would be better for the baby to be born before any celebration takes place, and it does not take long for that moment to arrive. 1 week later, Rudeus Greyrat, Rudeus's first daughter, is born. The little girl immediately attracts attention. In many ways, she looks like a miniature version of her father. Naturally, this raises a few interesting questions. How exactly do the Greyrat family genes work? Will the children inherit the same strong-willed personality that appears in so many members of the family? It is an interesting thing to wonder about. The day after Lucy's birth, Rudeus visits Paul's grave. Standing before the headstone, he shares the news with his father. He tells him that he now has a daughter and deeply regrets that Paul never had the chance to meet her. Then he finally says something he has carried inside for a very long time. He apologizes. He apologizes for not appreciating his father as much as he should have. He apologizes for his unfair criticism, and for the times he failed to recognize all of Paul's efforts. Even so, he makes a promise. Rudeus swears that he will do everything he can to become a good father to his daughter. Shortly after that moment, something strange happens. The sky changes. The shift is so dramatic that it goes unnoticed by no one. Rudeus senses it. His family senses it as well. Likewise, many of the characters we have followed throughout the story realize that something unusual is happening. No one knows for certain whether it is a sign of good news or the beginning of a new threat. For now, the mystery remains unanswered. The end.